Suffolk, June 1816. 200 people in the chapel at Montford Abbey, and the bride was walking away. Not running, walking. With the measured, unhurried composure of a woman who had considered her options, assessed the situation, and chosen the exit with the same precision she brought to shipping contracts and county negotiations and every consequential decision she had made since she was 19 years old. The Duke of Montford stood at the altar and watched her go. He did not call after her. He did not move. He said 5 words to the vicar beside him, 5 words that carried across the silence of 200 held breaths and landed in the county's collective memory with the permanence of something that could never be unsaid. "Let her leave," he said. By sunrise, half the nobles in Suffolk had turned against him, but that is the end of the story. The beginning is 9 months earlier, at a different wedding entirely, when the Duke of Montford first looked at Verayne Calloway and mistook her for something manageable. September 1815. The wedding was Lord Sefton's daughter to a naval captain of adequate fortune, held at Montford Abbey because the Duke had lent the chapel, as he agreed to most things requiring nothing of him personally. 200 guests, the full county, the kind of occasion Suffolk produced with the efficiency of people who understood that a wedding was a census of who mattered, who was present, and who had been seated where. Verayne Calloway arrived with her brother Hatton and the composure of a woman who understood these occasions without being impressed by them. She wore a dress the color of autumn oak leaves, a deep amber most women could not have carried, and she wore it with the ease of someone who had stopped performing for rooms several years ago. She was 26. Unmarried. Her father had been a shipbuilder in Ipswich who died 4 years earlier and left his daughter the yards, the contracts, and the education of a man who believed competence was not reserved for sons. She had his mind and her mother's face, and the combined result was a woman who could read a contract and a room with equal precision. The Duke was near the chapel entrance when she arrived. Tall, 41. The stillness of a man who had been important so long that importance was indistinguishable from his posture. He had been widowed 2 years. Lady Isabeau had died in the winter of 1813, and the county had mourned with the calibrated sincerity of people who had found her difficult in life and uncomplicated in death. It was during the breakfast that he spoke to her for the first time. Lady Drummond, who had arranged more marriages in Suffolk than any clergyman, materialized at Verayne's elbow. "Miss Calloway, the Duke has expressed an interest in meeting you." He crossed the room. He stood before her with the complete, evaluating attention of a man not making conversation but conducting an assessment. "Miss Calloway, I am told you manage your father's shipyards." "I manage my shipyards," she said. "My father is dead." Something shifted in his face. The recognition of a correction delivered without apology. "You are direct," he said. "I find it saves time. I am told you have declined 3 proposals in 3 years. 3 proposals and 1 suggestion from a man who lacked the courage to formalize it. I do not count suggestions. And the 3 you declined? They wanted a fortune with a wife attached. I am not an attachment to my own money." He was quiet. She saw in the quality of his stillness something she had not expected. Not evaluation. Something behind it that resembled the beginning of respect. "I will call on you Thursday at Orwell House," he said. It was not a question. 10 o'clock. I do not receive before 10. She did not know yet that Thursday would rearrange the next 8 months of her life. She did not know that the beginning of respect came with conditions that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a dead woman whose name he could not say without his jaw setting like stone. He arrived at Orwell House at 3 minutes past 10. She made him wait 4 minutes, standing in the hallway composing herself the way she composed for negotiations, because she had understood since the gallery that this was one. The drawing room at Orwell House was not fashionable. Contracts on the desk, shipping ledgers on the shelves. She saw him register all of it with the attention of a man who understood rooms. "I will be direct," he said. "I would prefer it. I am considering marriage, not as an abstraction, as a specific intention with specific requirements. I need a wife capable of managing a household of considerable complexity. Montford Abbey has 14 staff, 200 acres of tenanted farmland, and obligations met inconsistently since my wife's death." He paused. "And I need a wife who will not mistake the position for something it is not." What do you believe the position is? A partnership of a practical nature. And what is it not? He gazed past the window. It is not what it was the first time. Vervain saw with complete clarity that the blank space in his sentence was a wound dressed in language about requirements. Beneath it was a man who had been married to a woman who had made the position into something he could not name on a Thursday morning, and who had built from that wreckage a framework designed to prevent it from happening again. She thought about what it meant to be assessed for a position because of her shipyards and her ledgers, and dismissed as a person before she had spoken 20 words. She thought about a man who had organized pain into a requirement and called it pragmatism. She stood. "Thank you for your clarity, your grace," she said. He glanced up, surprised by her standing. She inclined her head. It was a precise inclination, the depth and duration calibrated with the exactness she brought to everything that mattered. The kind that acknowledged rank without conceding anything personal. The kind that said, "I understand exactly what is happening in this room, and I am choosing to walk out of it on my own terms." She held it for exactly the correct number of seconds. Then she collected Haddon from the hallway, where he had been reading a newspaper with the practiced invisibility of a man who understood his role, and was in the carriage before Lady Drummond had processed what had happened. Haddon said nothing until the Ipswich Road. "Well," he said. "He wants a ledger and address," she said. "He does not want a wife. The man has had a difficult time, Vervain. Lady Isabeau. I know what Lady Isabeau was. I also know what I am, and I am not a remedy for another man's history." Haddon studied the Suffolk countryside, passing in the September light. "What will you do?" She regarded the road ahead. "I have been considering Briarfield House," she said. "The listing came through in August. Sound property, strong tenancies, and the location is extremely convenient." Her brother was quiet. "Briarfield borders the Montfort estate. It is excellent property." "Vervain, it is a business decision, Haddon." He regarded her with the weariness of a man who had spent 26 years paying close attention to his sister and had developed a thorough understanding of what her business decisions looked like. He said nothing further. She turned to the window and thought about a drawing room with shipping ledgers and a man who had offered her an insult in the wrapping of a partnership and called it directness. And she almost believed that Briarfield House was entirely about the acreage. Briarfield House was purchased in October, which was faster than most property transactions in Suffolk because Vervain Calloway had her father's solicitors, her father's capital, and the determination of a woman who had decided something and was not interested in delay. The Duke of Montfort was informed of his new neighbor by his steward Hathaway, who mentioned it during the Tuesday accounts review in the manner of a man who considered the information significant and was presenting it as incidental. "Miss Calloway," the Duke said. He set down the tenancy report. "The shipbuilder's daughter?" "Yes, Your Grace. The sale completed on the 9th. The Duke turned toward the window that faced east, toward the boundary hedge that separated Montfort land from Briarfield, where the old elms stood in their October amber and the fields ran flat and open for a quarter-mile. He was quiet for a moment longer than the information required. "The eastern fence line," he said. "Has it been surveyed recently?" "Not in some years, Your Grace." "Have it done." Hathaway noted this. The accounts review continued, but the Duke's gaze returned to the eastern window once more before it was finished, and Hathaway, who had served 3 generations of Montforts and had learned that the things a Duke regarded twice were the things that mattered most, noted that as well. She arrived at Briarfield in the last week of October, which surprised the county. Late October was not the season for taking possession of a Suffolk estate. Late October was for London, for the remaining social calendar, for the careful maintenance of connections that kept a family visible. Arriving in the country now was for people whose positions were so established they required no maintenance, or for people who did not care about position at all. And Vervain appeared to be the second category performing as the first, which the county found interesting and had not yet decided whether to admire. She arrived with 2 carriages of household effects, a housekeeper from the Ipswich house named Mrs. Pembrose, and a surveyor whose specialty was property boundaries. Suffolk noticed all of this. Suffolk was a county that noticed things, being prosperous enough and proximate enough to London that there was always an audience for the interesting. She spent the first week learning the property. Every room, every outbuilding, every acre walked in the October cold with the methodical attention of a woman conducting an inventory. The house was sound but neglected. The previous owner had let the east pasture drainage deteriorate, the tenant cottage roofs wanted repair, and the orchard wall had a breach allowing deer into the kitchen garden. She noted all of it. She had a remediation plan drawn by Friday. On Saturday morning, she walked to the boundary hedge. The elms stood along the eastern edge, old and patient, and beyond them was Montford land, a tenant farm in the middle distance, the Abbey chimneys on the horizon. She stood at the hedge and considered deeds and precedent, and the particular way a county with long memory operated. She heard the horse before she saw it. He came from the Montford side at a pace that said he had known where she was and had come deliberately. He pulled up at the boundary and regarded her across it with the evaluating attention she recognized from the drawing room at Orwell House, the one that preceded a position already decided. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Your Grace." She did not incline her head. They were standing in a field. The inclination was for drawing rooms. "You have wasted no time." "I have not. The property required attention." "The boundary survey. My steward tells me you have engaged a surveyor." "I have. So have I." The October wind moved through the elm branches above them. "Then we shall have 2 surveys," she said, "and they will either agree, in which case the matter is straightforward, or they will not, in which case the matter is interesting." Something shifted in his bearing. Not the evaluation. Something less governed. "You are very direct," he said. "You told me you valued directness. In the drawing room, I took you at your word." He steadied the horse with a practiced hand and regarded her across the boundary with something she was going to have to think about later. "The east pasture drainage. That work will require access through the Montford lane. I am aware. I intended to write to your steward." "Write to me," he said. "The boundary concerns us both. Write to me directly." He turned the horse. "Good morning, Miss Calloway." "Good morning, Your Grace," she said to his retreating back, and stood at the boundary in the October cold, thinking about the word directly, and about the shift in his bearing, and went back to Briarfield, and did not think about either for the rest of the day, with moderate success. The surveys returned within a fortnight, confirming her legal position and complicating his historical one. The boundary line, according to the 1802 deed, ran along the northern side of the Elm Row. The Montford estate records dating to 1761 placed it along the southern side, 30 feet of Suffolk countryside, claimed by both estates for 50 years without confrontation. She wrote to him on a Thursday. The letter required 2 drafts. The first was too familiar. The second was precisely correct, factual, ending with a proposal for a meeting, which was the reasonable next step, and would also put her in a room with him again, which she was not going to examine too closely. His reply arrived the following morning, in his own hand. "Miss Calloway, the discrepancy is clear. I propose Saturday next, 10 o'clock, at the boundary. Bring the 1802 deed. I will bring the 1761 record. Montford." She read this twice. She noted the absence of pleasantries. She found this, against her better judgment, more appealing than elaborate politeness would have been. Saturday was cold and sharp in the way of Suffolk in November. She arrived at 5 minutes to 10. He was already there, on foot, the 1761 record in hand, Hathaway at his side. She had brought her surveyor. They spread the documents on the boundary wall and stood on opposite sides, reading each other's evidence with the focused attention of 2 people who were both entirely correct and entirely incompatible. "The deed is the operative legal document," she said. "Precedent carries weight in this county." "Precedent is not law. I find the distinction worth preserving." He studied her across the wall with an expression that had been shifting in their encounters, moving incrementally toward something that involved more than assessment. "You have done this before," argued a boundary. "My father's business involved considerable negotiation. I was present for most of it from 17. He had no sons. He had me. He decided early that this was either a liability or an advantage, and proceeded on the assumption of the latter." She met his gaze. He was not wrong. "Miss Calloway," the Duke said, his voice dropping below the formal register. "I am going to propose something." The 30 feet has 2 elms and a drainage channel and no practical use to either estate. I propose we agree to a shared boundary at the center, 15 feet each, recorded formally, with joint maintenance for the channel. You are proposing a compromise. I am proposing a resolution. You have 50 years of precedent. You could contest this through the county court and likely prevail. I could. Why do you not? Because it would take 18 months and cost both estates considerably, and at the end, one of us would have the 30 feet, and the other would have a grievance. And we are going to be neighbors for the foreseeable future. He met her gaze steadily. I prefer functional neighbors to legal victories. I accept, she said, on the condition that the formal record reflects the legal basis, not the historical one. Agreed. She extended her hand across the wall. He took it, the firm, brief grip of a man who meant what he agreed to, and shook it once. Good morning, Your Grace. Good morning, Miss Calloway. She walked back to Briarfield with the satisfaction of a woman who had held her ground and been met with something she had not expected. The neighborhood dinners began in December. Suffolk society in winter was a closed circuit, the same families rotating through the same rooms with the efficiency of long practice. Vervain had been received with cautious warmth, wealthy enough to be taken seriously, not titled enough to be taken for granted. She and the Duke were at the same dinner 3 times in December. The first at the Pemberton house, where one remark about the boundary settlement was overheard by Mrs. Pemberton and became the most discussed topic at the second dinner. The second, at Lady Drummond's, arranged with the transparent purpose of a woman who considered the settlement a promising development. The third at Montford Abbey, a formal occasion for 14, at which Vervain spent 40 minutes talking to Colonel Ashworth about the East Pasture irrigation, because Ashworth was one of the few people at the table who understood drainage and her pasture was still giving her difficulty. She was aware during the conversation that the Duke was listening, not visibly. He managed his end of the table with the precision of a man who had been doing it since 23. But she had developed a working sense of where his attention fell, and it fell, with a frequency she noted and set aside, toward her. At the end of the Montford dinner, Lady Drummond appeared at her elbow. He watches you. He has not watched anyone since Isabeau. Vervain studied her gloves. The history, Lady Drummond said carefully, is a wound he has been managing as a policy. Policies can be revised, with the right evidence. I purchased Briarfield as a business investment, Vervain said. Of course you did, Lady Drummond said, with the serenity of a woman who had been told the same thing in different language 3 times and had formed her own conclusion. Vervain watched her go and considered the word evidence, and about a woman named Isabeau who had been dead 2 years and was still the organizing principle of every room her husband entered. She thought, he has built a fortress from a marriage. And she wondered, standing in the entrance hall of that fortress with the December cold outside, what it would take to make him see that not everything beyond the walls was a threat. January brought the frost that locked the ground and turned the East Pasture Channel into a genuine problem. Ice in the channel, water backing into the lower field. She wrote to the Duke about the shared maintenance arrangement. He arrived at Briarfield on Tuesday afternoon, in person, on foot. She had expected a letter. She had not expected the Duke of Montfort in her entrance hall in a coat that was practical rather than fashionable, with mud on his boots, having walked 2 fields in January because he considered correspondence insufficient. I thought a look at the channel would be more useful than a letter, he said. She dismissed Mrs. Pembrose, took him out to the East Pasture in the cold, and walked him the full length of the channel. She showed him where the ice had backed the water, where the gradient was insufficient to clear the freeze. He listened with the complete attention she had come to expect, asked 2 questions that confirmed he understood the problem, and one that suggested he already knew the answer. If you redirected the inlet here, he said, pointing to the map, the fall would clear the ice before it built. That was my surveyor's conclusion. The work requires access through the Montford Lane. You have it. I will speak to Hathaway today. She studied him. He was bent over the drainage plan, breath visible in the cold, coat practical, boots muddy, and she noticed all of this, and was not going to account for the fact that she had noticed. You came yourself, she said. You could have sent Hathaway, or written. He held her gaze. I told you to write to me directly. That implies the same in return. They walked back to the house. She offered tea. He accepted. The first time he had accepted anything at Briarfield. And they sat in the study for 40 minutes talking about drainage, and then about the county road bill, and then about a volume on soil management she had on the shelf that he had also read. And neither of them mentioned the drawing room at Orwell House, or the inclination, or the word partnership. And the afternoon was entirely functional, and entirely not, she thought, as she watched him leave through the Briarfield gate in the January dusk, that a man who walks 2 fields in the cold to inspect a drainage channel is not a man conducting a functional assessment. She thought, he does not know that yet. And she thought, I am not going to be the one to tell him. The spring assembly at the Pemberton House was the first large gathering of the season. 40 guests. Vervain arrived with Lady Drummond, who had developed the habit of collecting her without formal arrangement, which was Lady Drummond's method of making alliances official without the inconvenience of discussion. The Duke was across the room when she entered, in conversation with Colonel Ashworth and 2 barristers, and he glanced up when she arrived, with the attention she had learned to identify and had stopped pretending not to notice. The evening moved. She talked spring planting with the Pembertons. She talked about the county road bill with Ashworth, and the Duke appeared at the Colonel's elbow at some point and stayed, and the 3 of them talked until the Colonel was summoned by his wife. And then it was just them. And the conversation moved without either steering it from roads to the east pasture to Briarfield's spring planting, to a question he asked about the Ipswich shipyards she had grown up in. That was the first question he had ever asked about her rather than about the land. She answered it. He listened. He asked a second. She thought, this is what it looks like when he is actually present. Lord Sefton arrived at her left shoulder. She had seen him circling for 20 minutes. She had decided it was within the normal range of a county evening. She was wrong. Miss Calloway, Sefton said, with the tone of a man about to be charming in a way that required an audience. 5 people within hearing. He had chosen his moment. Briarfield is looking remarkably well. Extensive improvements for someone so recently arrived. The drainage required attention. Drainage, he said with a smile at the listeners. Quite. One does wonder whether the improvements are, he paused with practiced timing, proportionate to the likely tenure. She held his gaze. That is to say, Suffolk has a certain character. A particular order. One hopes that new arrivals appreciate the character of the county before embarking on too ambitious a program of alteration. The word alteration did the work he had designed it to do. In another mouth, neutral. In his, it meant you are new money in old Suffolk, and you have reached beyond your station, and every person within hearing knows it. She was formulating her response when she heard the Duke's voice. The improvements at Briarfield, the Duke said from her right, in a voice she had not heard before. Not the drawing room voice. Not the boundary voice. The one underneath all of them. The one that carried 200 years of Suffolk in it and understood exactly what weight it held. Include a drainage redesign that has resolved a problem affecting both properties for 2 decades. He turned the full weight of his attention on Sefton. The investment is entirely proportionate, as anyone familiar with the land would know. Sefton's smile underwent a rapid recalibration. Of course, I merely. The county benefits from landowners who take their property seriously. I believe we are all agreed on that. He held Sefton's gaze for 1 moment longer than necessary, which was the ducal equivalent of a direct statement, then returned to conversation as though nothing had occurred. Sefton found someone else to address with the haste of a man corrected in public. Vervain stood beside the Duke and considered what had just happened. The weight of what he had said, how he had said it, the fact that he had said it at all. He did not glance at her. He was talking to the barristers about the road bill, and nothing in his manner indicated he had done something significant. She thought, he knows he has. She thought, he is waiting to see what I do with it. She crossed to Lady Drummond, who studied her face, then the Duke across the room, then her face again. He intervened, Vervain said. He did not have to. No, Lady Drummond said, and Sefton will be careful for the remainder of the season. He made it about the land, so that Sefton had no graceful way to continue, so that the room understood his position without a declaration, and so that you were defended without being diminished. She paused, which is a very particular kind of intelligence. Vervain held her glass and considered the months of boundary disputes and drainage channels and January afternoons in the study. And a man who had told her the position was not what it was the first time and had spent the subsequent months discovering that it was considerably more than he had assessed. "He was wrong about me," she said. "In the drawing room." "Yes," Lady Drummond said, "and he knows it. He is a man who does his accounting carefully. He required sufficient evidence." Vervain glanced across the room at the Duke. He met her gaze. Not the evaluating attention. The other one. The one she had stopped pretending not to notice. She held it for one beat longer than the social register required, then turned back to Lady Drummond and said something about the road bill, and the assembly continued around them, and neither of them said anything further that evening, and it cost them both considerably. He called at Briarfield 3 days after the assembly. She was in the east pasture inspecting the completed drainage work, which was not the condition in which she would have chosen to receive a Duke, but she had stopped arranging herself for his benefit sometime in January. She saw him at the Briarfield gate, on foot. He waited while she finished her conversation with the estate manager and walked back across the field. She did not hurry. He did not appear to expect her to. "It is working," he said, regarding the channel running clean in the March morning. "The lower field at Montford was dry this morning for the first time in 3 winters, he said. "Your surveyor's redesign solved both problems." He studied the gate between them, which she had not opened. "I owe you an apology," he said. "In the drawing room. In September. What I said. The manner in which I said it was not how I should have spoken to you." He was regarding the gatepost rather than her, the only indication that this was costing him something. "I came to that meeting with a position formed before I entered the room. A position that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with." He stopped. "Your first wife," she said. "I understood in the drawing room," she said. "That is why I left. Not because you insulted me, though you did, but because I understood that you were not seeing me at all. You were managing a grief. I am not Lady Isabeau," she said. "I am not a correction for Lady Isabeau. I am not a safer version of Lady Isabeau." "I know," he said. "I have known it since November. You are not a safer version of anything." "You are," he paused, "the most ungovernable person I have encountered in 18 years of governing a very large estate. And I mean that as a complete accounting of my situation." She considered a man who had entered a drawing room with a wound dressed as a policy, and had spent 4 months having the policy dismantled by drainage channels and boundary surveys, and a woman who knew what her place was and had purchased it at market value. "You defended me at the assembly," she said. "Sefton was. You defended me." Before he finished his sentence, he met her eyes. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he was wrong, and I was the person in that room most qualified to say so, and the most obligated to." He paused. "And because you had already made the case better than I could. I wanted it on record." She thought about the inclination at Orwell House, the exiting one, and about what she had decided to do with it now. She opened the gate. "Come in. The east pasture is worth seeing properly, and I believe I owe you tea." He came through. He fell into step beside her. The March morning was clear. The field was running clean, and Suffolk went about its business around them, and nothing had been resolved and everything had been said that needed saying first. The tea was in the Briarfield study. She had chosen the study because it was where she worked, and because she was not going to stage a drawing room as though this were a morning call. It was not a morning call. It was a man who had come through a gate she had opened and who had said, "Because you had already made the case," and who was sitting across from her desk with nothing managed in his bearing at all. Mrs. Pembrose brought the tea and left. Vervain poured, handed him his cup and sat back. He surveyed the room, the desk covered in estate papers and shipping contracts and a letter from her Ipswich solicitor. "You work here. Every morning. The drawing room is for visitors. The study is for work." She paused. "You are not a visitor." He set down his cup. "In my experience, women who have studies they work in are either eccentric or formidable, occasionally both. And which category have you assigned me?" "I have been revising the categories since approximately November." She considered the apology at the gate, the one that had not deflected into self-justification, that had named what he did and named the reason and stopped. She had spent 4 months trying to dislike him with consistency, and had found the task increasingly impossible. "I want to say something about the drawing room," she said. "About September. I understood what you were doing the moment you said it. You were not describing me. You were describing what you needed after what you had been through. I did not leave because I was insulted. I left because staying would have required me to argue with you, and arguing in that moment would have required you to defend a position you held for reasons neither of us were ready to discuss." She paused. The inclination was the only honest exit. The inclination? It said what needed saying. "I see you. I am not arguing. I am leaving." He was still for a moment. It was the most precise thing anyone has ever done in my presence. I thought about it for a week. "What did you conclude? That I had managed the interview very badly, and that you had managed it very well, and that the woman who inclined her head like that was not a woman who knew her place in the sense I had implied. She was a woman who knew her place in a sense that meant something entirely different, something about dignity and self-possession, and the decision to leave a room before it became a scene." A pause. It was not the quality I had been looking for. "No," she said. "It was a better one." She held her cup and considered the man across her desk, and what it meant to watch someone revise their accounting in real time, and find the revised version something she had not prepared for. "Edmund," she said. He stilled. She had not used his name before. She had used his title, his grace, and occasionally the space where a name would go. And now, the name was in the Briarfield study, and neither of them could retrieve it. "Yes," he said. "I bought this estate because of you." "Not entirely. The property is sound, and the investment was rational. But I bought it knowing it bordered yours, and I told myself it was business, and I almost believed it for about 3 weeks. I was angry. I wanted you to see me. Not the shipyards and the fortune, not the category I had been assigned. I thought if I were your neighbor, you would have to see me eventually." "That was not a mature strategy," she said. "It was an effective one," he said. "It resulted in a boundary dispute and a drainage crisis. It resulted in you being here in this study, having this conversation." He paused. "I consider the investment sound." He stood and came around the desk, and she stood because this was not a conversation for sitting, and they were very close in the Briarfield study with the March light coming through the tall windows and 4 months of boundary disputes behind them. "I was wrong about you in September. I was wrong before I met you, and I was wrong in the meeting, and I am asking." He stopped. "I am asking whether I am too late to be right." She did not incline her head. She placed her hand on his arm, flat and deliberate, and said, "You are not too late." He covered her hand with his. He kissed her. It was not tentative. It had the honesty of a man who had been revising his position for 4 months and had arrived at a conclusion he was prepared to act on. She kissed him back with the same precision she brought to contracts and drainage plans and every true thing she had ever decided, and the study was warm and the shipping contracts were on the desk, and none of it required any further management. When they separated, she kept her hand on his arm. "The boundary agreement," she said. "Settled. The drainage channel. Working. The east pasture. Dry. Are we conducting a full property review? I am establishing that the practical matters are in order before addressing the impractical ones." He regarded her with the corner of his mouth doing the thing it did when he was suppressing a smile. "You are going to be very difficult to be married to. Is that a proposal?" "It is a preliminary assessment preceding a proposal. My preliminary assessment is that you are going to find it considerably harder to maintain a policy around someone who lives next door and has read all the same books. I have noticed that my policies have been performing terribly in this neighborhood." He took her hand. "Vervain, her name. The specific, irreplaceable sound of it. Edmund," she said, and this time it carried everything she had not said since September. April in Suffolk was the county at its most alert, the gardens establishing themselves, the social calendar thickening. Vervain and the Duke were engaged by the 2nd week of April. He had asked formally in the Briarfield study with the directness she had come to trust, and she had said yes, and they had shaken hands on it before either registered the absurdity of shaking hands on an engagement, and then he had regarded their clasped hands and she had laughed, a small, real sound with nothing managed in it, and he had received it with what she now understood was his version of complete happiness. Haddon received the news with the satisfaction of a man who had watched his sister purchase a neighboring estate and had understood exactly what she was doing. The Duke of Montford, the man who wanted a ledger and a dress. He has revised that position considerably. He came through my gate and apologized without qualification, and then sat in my study and said the inclination was the most precise thing he had encountered in a decade. She paused. I find I cannot hold a man's September against him when his March is everything it should be. Is he good enough for you? She considered this honestly. He is trying to be. That is the best version of the answer. The Duke's reply to Haddon's formal letter arrived addressed to Vervain, which told her something. It said, Your brother's letter was generous and entirely beside the point. I am marrying you. The accounts will follow. E. She placed it in the drawer where she kept his letters. There were 9. Lady Drummond called on Thursday. Well, she said before she had fully sat down. Well, Vervain agreed. He kissed you in the study. I prefer not to confirm specific details. You have confirmed them entirely. Lady Drummond settled with the composure of someone preparing for a full accounting. He was happy when he called on me yesterday. I have not seen him happy in 3 years. He is good for me, Vervain said, which is the thing I did not expect. I expected to prove a point. I expected to be right. She paused. I did not expect to discover that he was also right about certain things, and that those things were what made him worth the argument. What was he right about? That a woman who knows her place is a formidable thing. He had entirely the wrong definition of place, but the instinct was not wrong. The engagement dinner, Lady Drummond said. First week of May, the full county. She paused at the study door. Sefton will be invited, because it is better to have him at the table where he must behave than outside it where he will not. And because the sight of Lord Sefton congratulating you on your engagement will be one of the most satisfying things I have witnessed in recent memory, I am not above enjoying it. I find I am not above it either. The engagement dinner was the first Friday of May. 44 people. She wore the amber, a better version, sent by Haddon from London. Edmund regarded her and said, The amber again. I find it works. It does. Sefton congratulated them at the end of the meal, with the grace of a man who had no remaining options and was managing them. He said the correct things. When he said them to Vervain, she met his gaze with the composed directness that was her natural register, and nothing further was required. It was after the engagement dinner, on the following Tuesday, that the crisis arrived. Vervain was in the Briarfield study, reviewing the summer planting schedule when Haddon appeared in the doorway with a letter, and the expression of a man delivering information he wished he did not possess. This was circulated in Ipswich this morning, he said. It will reach the county by tomorrow. The letter was from Lord Sefton's solicitor, addressed to the principal families of Suffolk. It was written with the particular care of a man constructing a legal document designed to function as a social weapon. It detailed, with citations and dates, the circumstances of Lady Isabeau's final year, the debts she had accumulated in secret, the creditors the Duke had settled privately, and the specific terms of a financial arrangement between the Montford estate and a family in Hampshire that had been, the letter suggested with practiced delicacy, not entirely consistent with the dignity expected of a ducal household. The letter concluded with the observation that the Duke's current engagement to a woman of commercial fortune raised questions about whether the pattern of financial entanglement was a matter of character rather than circumstance. Vervain read it twice. She set it down on the desk beside the planting schedule and the shipping contracts, and sat in complete stillness for 4 minutes, which was longer than she had been still since she was 12 years old. It is designed to destroy the engagement, Haddon said. It is designed to humiliate him, she said. The engagement is incidental damage. She considered the letter. She considered the man who had written it, or rather the man who had commissioned it, Lord Sefton, who had been corrected at an assembly and had spent 2 months constructing his retaliation with the patience of a man who understood that social warfare required preparation. She considered what the letter would do when it reached the county, the sympathy it would generate for Lady Isabeau, the questions it would raise about Edmund's judgment. The particular poison of the phrase commercial fortune applied to her own name, linking her to Isabeau's debts as though marrying for money were a confession rather than a commonplace. She considered what Edmund would do when he saw it. She put on her coat and walked to Montford Abbey. He was in the estate office when she arrived, and she saw from the document on his desk that the letter had already reached him. He was standing at the window with his back to the room in the particular stillness of a man who had been struck and was deciding how to absorb the blow. "You have seen it," she said. "Yes. And?" He did not turn from the window. "It is accurate. The details about Isabeau, the debts, the Hampshire arrangement, all of it is accurate, which is what makes it effective. I did not ask whether it was accurate. I asked what you intend to do." He turned then, and she saw in his face something she had not seen before, not the wound managed as policy. The wound itself, unmanaged, raw, the thing he had been organizing and containing for 2 years now exposed in a solicitor's letter for the county's consumption. "I intend," he said, "to release you from the engagement." The room was very quiet. "I will not have you attached to this," he said. "Sefton has made this about my judgment. If you remain engaged to me, you become evidence in his argument. Your fortune becomes proof of his thesis. I will not permit that." She regarded him across the estate office, across the letter and the wound and 2 years of careful management, now undone in a single morning, and she understood with absolute clarity what was happening. He was doing it again. He was building a policy from a wound. He was constructing a framework of protection that she had not asked for and did not want, and he was calling it consideration, the same way he had called his requirements pragmatism in September, and he was wrong in exactly the same way. "No," she said. "Vervain, no. You do not get to decide what I am attached to. You decided that in September. You decided what I was and what the position was and what I needed, and you were wrong about every particular, and I walked out of your drawing room because of it." She held his gaze. "I did not buy the neighboring estate and argue the boundary and fix the drainage channel and fall in love with you over a shared maintenance agreement so that you could protect me from a man like Sefton by giving him exactly what he wants." He was very still. "Sefton wants me gone," she said. "He wants the engagement broken. He wants you isolated and diminished, and return to the version of yourself that does not defend women at assemblies or compromise on boundary disputes, or walk 2 fields in January to inspect a drainage channel. He wants the fortress." She paused. "And you are rebuilding it for him." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "What would you have me do?" "Marry me," she said. "On Saturday, at the village church, as planned. And let the county decide for itself what the letter means, because the county has been watching us for 8 months, and they are not stupid, and they know what Sefton is. And if they decide against me, then they decide against us. And we will have Briarfield and Montford and 2 estates, and a functioning drainage channel and each other, and Lord Sefton will have the satisfaction of a man who won a battle and lost every ally worth having." He considered her across the estate office. She watched him do it. She watched the wound and the policy and the reflex to protect fighting against the evidence of 8 months and the woman standing before him who had never once required protection and was not going to start accepting it now. "You are ungovernable," he said. "You have mentioned this. I am going to marry you on Saturday." "Yes," she said, "you are." She turned and walked out of the estate office and back across the fields to Briarfield, and the May afternoon was warm and the countryside was indifferent to all of it, and she was shaking, very slightly, which she was not going to acknowledge because she had just delivered the most important argument of her life, and the trembling was merely the cost of having meant every word. The wedding was Saturday, the village church between the 2 estates. The letter had reached every family in the county by Thursday, and the result was precisely what Sefton had designed. Half the guest list sent regrets. The Pembertons came. Colonel Ashworth came. Lady Drummond came with the energy of a woman who considered absence from this wedding a personal failing in anyone who committed it. Lord Sefton did not come, which was his declaration, and approximately half of those who had been at the engagement dinner followed his lead, which was theirs. Vervain walked in on Haddon's arm and saw the chapel half full, the empty pews visible and deliberate. She saw the faces that had come and the spaces where faces should have been, and she felt Haddon's arm tighten under hers, the protective reflex of a brother who had not expected the absence to look this pointed. She was halfway down the aisle when Lady Sefton, who had come despite her husband's boycott and who Vervain had not noticed in the second pew, leaned into the aisle and said, in the carrying whisper of a woman who wanted to be heard, "She cannot possibly go through with this. Someone should tell her what she is walking into." Vervain stopped. The chapel was very quiet. 200 people had been invited. Fewer than 100 were present, and every one of them was watching. She turned. She did not turn toward Lady Sefton. She turned toward the door, toward the September light coming through the entrance, and for one moment she stood in the aisle facing the exit with Haddon's arm still under hers and the silence of the chapel pressing against her back. Edmund saw it from the altar. He saw the turn, the stillness, the door. He saw the woman he had spent 8 months watching revise every assumption he had ever held, standing in the aisle of his chapel with the exit behind her and the decision entirely hers. The vicar beside him shifted. Someone in the front pew moved as if to rise. "Let her leave," Edmund said. The words carried. They carried with the particular quality of a man who understood what he was saying and meant it completely. Not cruelty, not indifference. Permission. The recognition that she had never needed his permission for anything, and the refusal to pretend otherwise now. Let her leave meant she is not mine to keep, and if she walks out of this chapel she will be right to, and I will not be the man who held her here through obligation or guilt. The chapel held its breath. Vervain stood in the aisle with the door behind her and the altar before her, and the words "let her leave" hanging in the air where 200 people should have been, and fewer than 100 were. She thought about September and the drawing room and the inclination. She thought about a man who had just told a room full of witnesses that she was free to leave, knowing that half of those witnesses had already left him this week, and that if she left now, the other half might follow. She turned back toward the altar. She walked the remaining distance with the measured composure she had brought to every important decision since she was 19, and the chapel was quiet, and Haddon's arm was steady under hers. And she did not hurry, and Edmund did not look away. She thought about all the versions of the inclination. The first, at Orwell House, the exiting one. "I see you, and I am leaving." The second, at the assembly after Sefton, when she had caught Edmund's gaze across the room. "I see what you did." The third, in the study the day he came through the gate. The deliberate absence. "I am not performing for you anymore." She had thought about the fourth version. She had decided in April that it would not be an inclination at all. She reached the front of the church. Edmund regarded her with the full, unmanaged attention. Nothing of September in it. Nothing of the drawing room. Nothing of the man who had organized his grief into a policy. Just him. Entirely present. She did not incline her head. She took his hand. He held it. And then he did not let go. After the ceremony, Vervain found Lady Drummond in the garden at Montford Abbey, standing by the east wall with a glass of wine and the expression of a woman who had witnessed something she intended to remember for a very long time. "Half the pews were empty," Vervain said. "Half the pews were full," Lady Drummond said. "And by Christmas, the empty half will be sending calling cards and pretending they were here." Sefton overplayed his hand. The letter was clever. What he did not account for was you walking back down that aisle after Edmund told the room to let you go. She paused. "That is the thing the county will remember. Not the letter. Not the empty pews." The woman who was given the door and chose the altar. She sipped her wine. "The county will reach its conclusion at its own pace, which is slow and thorough and final." Edmund found her in the West Garden as the afternoon light moved across Suffolk in the long golden way of June evenings that did not want to end. She was studying the rose beds with the focused attention of a woman already redesigning something. "The roses are in the wrong beds," she said. "The climbers should be on the south wall." "Vervain." She turned. He was regarding her with the expression that was entirely his own, the one that had nothing of September and everything of the months since. "The roses are yours," he said. "All of it. The West Garden and the East Pasture and the boundary and the channel. All of it is yours in every sense that matters." She considered the roses in their wrong beds, and thought about knowing her place, and what it had meant in September, and what it meant in June, and how completely one phrase could turn itself inside out over 9 months with the right evidence applied to it. "I am going to move the roses," she said. "I know. And the library at Montford needs reorganizing. The system has no logical basis. The library is yours. She stepped toward him. He met her in the middle of the West Garden, between the wrong roses and the long June light, and the Montford chimneys above them and the Briarfield chimneys in the distance. 2 estates on either side of a boundary they had settled in November, and were now, in every sense, beyond. She inclined her head. It was the 4th inclination. Not the exiting one, not the assembly acknowledgement, not the deliberate absence. This one was full and deep and precise, the kind that required complete control to perform and complete intention to offer. She held it for exactly the correct number of seconds, and then rose and met his gaze directly. He understood it completely. She saw him understand it. I see you. I am not leaving. I am here. Vervain, he said, and her name in his voice had all of September and October and November, and every month since in it, and none of it was a wound anymore. Edmund, she said. He took her hand. She let him. The June evening went on around them, warm and unhurried, entirely indifferent to whether any of it had been practical, and the answer they had both arrived at was that it had been. Just not in the way she had told herself in September. The best investments, her father had always said, were the ones you understood better after you had made them than before. She understood this one completely.